Lost in Space premiered on September 15th, 1965. Now the show changed during its brief run, kind of to fit the television landscape that was happening then. It basically was broken down into 3 different shows over its 3 seasons. And that's probably one of the reasons that it becomes so fascinating and is such a neat show to take a look at. In the first year, it was a black and white sci-fi adventure. During the second season, it changed to color. And this wasn't just in the cinematography of the show. The actual tone of the show changed to color too. See, it was up against Batman on the schedule, which had a light-hearted appeal. And then in the final season, which was the 3rd season, the crew and the Robinson family get off the planet and set off into an increasingly creative and almost downright crazy, bizarre adventure. Now, the series was huge on recycling. And it almost had to be because of the type of show it was. It always cleverly repurposed props and effect shots that would help them cut down on the cost of production. They would take original items and apply a little glue and paint, and voila, you had a totally different product. Now, just saying that they recycled products, it didn't mean that the producers were cheap. As a matter of fact, the Jupiter 2 actually cost more to produce than the Starship Enterprise. Jupiter 2 cost about $350,000, and that's about $2.5 million in today's bucks. Those were actually real computers that you see in the Jupiter 2. Its iconic computers appear in numerous sci-fi settings, and that computer is a computer that's made by a company that was a real company called Burroughs. They manufactured business machines in St. Louis. The B-205 was a large box with an array of blinking bulbs that had 3 knobs across the bottom. You see 3 of these units set at the controls of the Jupiter 2. Like I said, you see him pop up in a lot of the Irwin Allen stuff that he did. Now, Irwin Allen pitched the idea of the series to a CBS programmer named James Aubrey, who immediately just fell in love with the idea. A couple of weeks later, Gene Roddenberry pitched an idea for Star Trek, the original series, to this same CBS programmer. And he was turned down because he felt that Lost in Space was the more commercial of the 2. It's kind of interesting that we associate this show with the catchphrase, "Danger, Will Robinson, danger, Will Robinson." But this phrase was only uttered once in the entire series of the 83 episodes that were produced. It's more likely that you heard the words danger, danger, and they were not followed by any particular name. This was heard numerous times during the show. I think Danger, Will Robinson just has a certain ring to it, and that's what we remember. The famous Star Wars composer John Williams also wrote both versions of the theme song for the show, with the first version being used in seasons 1 and 2, and the second version being used in season 3. Now, the robot costume was really top-heavy. It had a 250-pound upper section and a 100 to 125-pound lower section. At the beginning of Lost in Space, The Space Trader, an episode from 1966, the director insisted on filming the robot running up to the Jupiter 2 ramp from a distance. So Bob May had to wear the full robot suit. Angela Cartwright actually stepped on the tow cable as she ran in front of the robot. This combination of a sudden jerk and the top heaviness of the robot made it topple over backwards, and this is actually visible for a split second in the action. Bob May was knocked around in there and almost knocked unconscious in the fall, but he luckily was not really injured. The suit didn't suffer much damage at all, and filming continued. Now, initially, Irwin Allen was very keen to enlist the help of NASA, and the space agency was actually equally interested in using the TV series to promote the way they do things. However, after they had several conversations with Allen, NASA realized that the producer had no interest whatsoever in scientific accuracy, and so they distanced themselves from the project. It's been long rumored that Dr. Smith was only supposed to be on the show for a few episodes and then be killed off. This is actually not true, and probably just a scenario imagined by Jonathan Harris, who is listed as a special guest star throughout the run of the series. This billing occurred because the billing of the other 6 actors was already contractually set before the show went into production as a series. Special guest star was done at Harris's request, and the producer agreed to do it that way. It's kind of funny to note that as the series progressed, kissing scenes between John and Maureen Robinson were toned down. Now, this wasn't out of any censorship demands that arose, but it was basically done to avoid boring and embarrassing or alienating the bulk of the audience members that were juveniles. The show was actually originally titled Space Family Robinson, but this was changed by CBS because of concerns that the title was too close to the Disney film Swiss Family Robinson, and also because Gold Key Comics had been publishing a comic book called Space Family Robinson with a different Robinson family who were lost in space sometime before the TV series began. After some back and forth over rights issues, the studios reached a deal with Gold Key Comics, which would allow them to change the name of their comic to Lost in Space. Now, it's said that the show's creator, Irwin Allen, was really not a very positive influence on the set. According to some of the cast members, he took things a little too seriously, and he really didn't endear himself to the people that were involved in the production. He also had a reputation for being difficult to work with, and this was despite the fact that many of his films and his TV endeavors were highly successful. If you ever noticed any similarities between the robot on Lost in Space and Robbie the Robot from the 1956 sci-fi classic called Forbidden Planet, then you probably won't be surprised to learn that they were both designed by Robert Kinoshita. Robbie the Robot actually made a guest appearance on 2 Lost in Space episodes, one of them War of the Robots, where he appeared as a robotoid, and in another episode in 1967, he played a prison guard. Partway through the first season, the producers were feeling kind of lukewarm towards Dr. Smith's antagonistic role, and they gave Harris the license to play with his character. The actor then set loose and decided to gradually ramp up his character and the many insults that he directed at the robot. As goofy as many of their exchanges were, Dr. Smith and the robot's Laurel and Hardy routine became a real audience pleaser. Now, Guy Williams retired from acting after Lost in Space. He came to fame for playing Zorro on TV between 1957 and 1961, and then he had the role of Dr. John Robinson from 1965 to 1968. After the first season, he was completely disappointed in the series. When he was hired for the role, he thought it was going to be a serious role, as it basically was a serious sci-fi role during the first season. But as the last 2 seasons continued, things got sillier and sillier, and he had trouble with the actual production and was kind of glad to see it canceled. He basically felt pretty misled by the series. But no worries, he said goodbye to Hollywood. He had invested well, and he moved to Argentina, and he lived there for the rest of his life. He wasn't the only one that really didn't like the way the show ended up. CBS chairman William Paley really prided himself on the fact that CBS produced quality, thoughtful programming, and he absolutely hated the show, and he just couldn't understand why it was so popular. He told the executives under him to cancel the thing the minute the ratings dropped. You see, the show was costing about $130,000 an episode to produce, which is actually a pretty modest amount for a show of this type. In early 1968, while the final third season episode, Junkyard in Space, was in production, the cast and crew were informally led to believe that the series would return for a fourth season. The producer had actually ordered new scripts for the coming season. A few weeks later, CBS announced a list of returning television shows for the 1968-1969 season, and Lost in Space was not included on this list. They never really gave a reason why it was canceled, but you can bet money that the reason was because CBS just didn't like this show. But the audiences did. What a great show, and what great memories this brings back for me. As corny as it was most of the time, it was great viewing for a youngster. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.